Elias Ford arrived at the rooftop weather lab above Seattle's National Weather Service office before the sky had made up its mind about dawn. The city was still soaked in sodium orange streetlight, and a wisp of fog shimmered over Lake Union. To most of the staff, the expanse of rubberized flooring beside the radar dome looked like wasted space. To Elias, it was a studio, a place where maps and algorithms could be translated into something intelligible to muscles, ligaments, breath. He slipped earbuds under unruly curls, queued up an instrumental track that pulsed like distant thunder, and let graphs dissolve into movement. The wind shear he'd seen on the 4 a.m. models was jagged, almost syncopated. He pivoted on one heel, torso tilting 42 degrees, the same deviation he had measured between the warm coastal flow and the descending Arctic air. A sweep of his arms traced the outermost rain bands predicted to spiral over Puget Sound. When he finished, breath fogging in the cold, he understood what the numbers had been hinting. The system would wobble south at the last minute, sparing the city but drenching the foothills. He texted the update to headquarters before the elevator doors opened to deliver the first wave of coffee-clutching colleagues. They teased him, some lovingly, some not, about his forecast ballet, but his accuracy record was the best in the Pacific Northwest. So supervisors learned to ignore security footage of their senior meteorologist pirouetting near the anemometers. What none of them saw was how the movement refined his intuition, how the atmosphere spoke loudest when equations alone fell silent. That afternoon, Seattle Center hosted an interdisciplinary symposium on embodied data. Elias had been roped into offering a demo, more for the novelty than for scientific merit. He hated lecturing in front of crowds, but he appeased the organizers with a brief, controlled rendition of a coastal fog model, then attempted to slink toward the exit before the panel discussion began. A ripple of motion stopped him. On stage, a woman in charcoal leggings stepped into the circular pool of light. Short black hair framed a face alive with concentration. The program identified her as Kaya Moreno, choreographer, resident artist for Motion Speak Dance Theater. She was deaf, the moderator explained, and would communicate through a sign language interpreter stationed at the wings. Kaya lifted her hands. The interpreter's voice filled the hall while Kaya's fingers flashed with kinetic precision. "I do not hear wind," the interpreter translated. "I see it in the sway of cedar boughs, the flutter of a scarf, the way fog curls around street lamps. My company creates choreography by reading these patterns. Air has syntax. We dance its grammar." Elias felt a prickling at the base of his neck. Air has syntax. That sentence resonated with every dawn he had spent mapping storms through pliés and pivots. He was halfway to the stage before he realized he had moved. The reception that followed smelled of brie and fresh rainfall. Elias waited while well-wishers congratulated Kaya. When the circle thinned, he tapped her shoulder and introduced himself, gesturing clumsily in the fragments of American Sign Language he remembered from a college elective. She smiled, rescuing him with quick, elegant signs. "Slow down. No worries. Talk." They commandeered a small table. He spoke, and the interpreter, Kaya's longtime collaborator, Jessa, sat beside her to translate. Elias confessed his quiet method of forecasting storms through movement. Kaya's eyes widened, then narrowed with analytic satisfaction. She signed to Jessa, who relayed, "You are a meteorologist who dances. I am a dancer who meteorologizes. Clearly, we should compare notes." A week later, they met on Kaya's home turf, a drafty studio in a converted Pioneer Square warehouse. Wide windows framed Elliott Bay, where cargo ships grazed gray water. Kaya's dancers stretched along the bar, curiosity bright in their postures. Jessa sat with a notepad, ready. Elias projected Doppler radar onto a brick wall. Green and yellow splotches crawled over Washington's topography. Instead of lecturing, he stepped into the image, allowing color to spill across his chest. He lifted his left arm. The on-screen vortex responded to his shadow, morphing. It was an illusion, but the symbolism landed. The dancers murmured, then joined him, mirroring ridges and troughs with their bodies. Kaya took center floor. She could not hear the low drone of air handling fans, but she sensed pressure shifts, the way some people sensed moods. She tilted her head as if consulting unseen currents, then launched into motion, both fluid and abrupt, hips surging like pressure gradients, fingertips flicking staccato rain. The ensemble followed, turning Elias's meteorological shapes into something feral and urgent. Time dissolved. When they finally stopped, sweat stippled the hardwood. Kaya signed, cheeks flushed. Storm arriving Thursday night will be stronger than your model's show. Elias frowned. The ensemble stilled. She continued, your numbers rely on sensors at 2,000 feet. I tracked gusts skimming the bay this morning. Different language, same story, only louder. He studied the latest satellite loops on his tablet. The algorithm placed landfall at category nothing special. Yet Kaya's kinetic reading told another tale. Let's test both, he suggested, heart pounding with equal parts scientific zeal and the glow of her proximity. Dance the upper air winds you perceive, a dance the model will overlay. What followed looked reckless. Two adults circling each other like weather fronts, sometimes colliding, sometimes spinning away. His limbs traced the restrained arcs of official projections. Hers cut sharper, faster angles. The discrepancy leaped off their bodies. Watching, Elias felt his gut align with hers. The storm was stronger. At 3 a.m., he revised his forecast, citing additional low-level wind observations. He left out the pirouettes. Bureaucracy preferred its oracles machine-made. Still, he urged city emergency management to prep sandbags east of Issaquah Creek. The next evening, Escher-stacked clouds rolled in like steel shutters. Rain hammered cedar roofs. Gusts rattled apartment windows. By dawn, foothill rivers had swollen, but Seattle remained largely unscathed. Local news interviewed emergency directors who praised the timely forecast. Elias texted Kaya one word, thanks. She replied with a bitmapped gif of a dancer bowing. Their success fed appetites on both sides. Kaya proposed a public performance that would translate real-time atmospheric data into dance, educating audiences and demonstrating practical benefit. Elias, who once avoided spotlights, surprised himself by agreeing. The mayor's office, eager for art-science crossovers, granted them the amphitheater at Gasworks Park for the Summer Solstice Festival. Provided they also produced a 5-day outlook for boating safety on Lake Washington. They met daily. Mornings in Elias's lab, where Kaya's presence turned fluorescent sterility into a kinetic playground. Afternoons in the studio, where Elias learned to feel silence the way she did, reading intent through breath rather than words. He asked her to teach him proper ASL. Finger-spelling weather jargon left them laughing, palms clumsy, until laughter softened into something quieter. An elastic hush, neither wholly scientific nor romantic, yet charged with both. One humid Tuesday, while they calibrated motion capture sensors to convert wind speed into stage lighting, a ridge of high pressure settled offshore, blocking marine breezes. Seattle roasted at 92 degrees. Elias wiped sweat from his brow and noticed a faint scar just below Kaya's left earlobe. He hadn't seen it before, her hair usually covered it. What happened there? He asked. Jessa was out running errands, so he used his burgeoning sign skills. Kaya hesitated, then traced the scar with 2 fingertips. Childhood ear infection, went septic. Lost most hearing by age 6, she signed slowly so he could follow. Parents feared I'd never love music, but wind told better stories. He replied, I'm glad it did. The honesty surprised him. Color rose to Kaya's cheeks. Preparations accelerated. Engineers rigged cables from the amphitheater's lighting grid to Elias's laptop, which would receive updates from NOAA servers every 10 minutes. Kaya's dancers rehearsed sequences coded to parameters. Barometric dips triggered floor rolls, rising humidity summoned suspended lifts. Lightning potential demanded explosive leaps. Spectators would, in effect, watch the weather forecasted in real time. The night before the solstice show, models hinted at trouble, a powerful atmospheric river forming over the Pacific, set to aim north. But the track was uncertain. Elias stayed late, cross-referencing data. At 2 a.m., he felt a familiar itch between shoulder blades. He stood, shoved chairs aside, and danced. The swirl he traced arced south, then veered east sooner than predicted, funneling directly over Seattle on performance night. If he were wrong, he'd alarm thousands and forfeit public trust. If he were right and said nothing, the city would be blindsided. He drove to Kaya's studio through mist that smelled of salt and diesel. She was there because of course she was, still awake, tweaking choreography. He explained, hands flying with urgency. She listened, eyes steady, then walked to the open window, where wind toyed with the curtain. She stepped onto the floor and performed a solo unlike anything he'd witnessed. A telescoping series of arcs and collapses, shoulders whipping, knees buckling as if under sudden torrents. When she finished, she looked at him, breathing hard, and signed one word: confirm. Elias filed an emergency bulletin at dawn. The mayor's office balked tourism dollars. Logistic nightmares, but eventually activated contingency plans. Additional shelter beds, drainage inspections, ferry schedule alerts. News outlets praised the city's caution, yet hinted at overreaction. Forecast by interpretive dance? Really? Solstice morning broke under deceptively mild skies. Crowds gathered at gasworks anyway, picnic baskets and sun hats at the ready. Kaya's dancers warmed up backstage. Elias coordinated with technicians. He wore a discreet lapel pin depicting a cumulonimbus cloud, a gift from Kaya earlier that day. She wore a matching pin shaped like a Doppler swirl. At 2 p.m. the performance began. A thin veil of cirrus rippled overhead, foreshadowing. Stage lights shifted between cool blues and amber as sensors fed data into the board. The dancers echoed cumulus buildups with buoyant jumps. Children squealed, parents applauded. Halfway through, the wind changed, abrupt, smelling of kelp and ozone. On Elias's monitor, real-time graphs spiked. He glanced at Kaya. She was already moving, signaling the cast. The music's tempo amplified through subwoofers so Kaya could feel vibrations slowed, then fractured into polyrhythmic drumming. Dancers dropped to the floor, undulations mimicking updrafts. Stage lights strobed crimson, convection alert. Spectators hushed. A sheet of distant rain advanced across Lake Union like a dark militia. The dancers sprinted downstage, arms slicing air, then scattered toward exits, guiding the audience with urgent gestures. Park volunteers, prepped by emergency drills, opened evacuation routes toward covered shelters. Elias made sure the crew secured equipment, then realized Kaya was alone, center stage, gaze locked on the storm front. He ran back, heart lurching. She stood upright, arms extended as if welcoming the deluge. Raindrops began to slap the iron remnants of the old gas plant, pinging metal like cymbals. He reached her, signed frantically, "Need go, flash flood possible." She stared at the sky, water streaking her face, then touched his lapel pin. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled him into the final phrases of her solo. They danced. Two silhouettes against a curtain of rain, shoes slipping on wet boards, clothing plastered to skin. He followed her lead, mirroring crescents of arms, spirals of torso that symbolized both vortex and embrace. Around them, the amphitheater emptied. Only technicians under the awning stayed, recording. Thunder boomed over Ballard. When the last chord of the track vibrated through the subwoofers, they stopped. Inches apart, she lifted her hands. "You hear that?" she signed with a teasing eyebrow. "Thunder," he mouthed, knowing she read lips well enough. No, she replied, fingertips grazing his jaw. Applause. He listened. Beyond the downpour, cheers echoed from shelter tents where the audience, safe and dry, clapped, whistled, stomped. Appreciation traveled on water-laden air, shaking the ground. Officials later credited the early evacuation with preventing injuries. Footage of two drenched figures dancing at the edge of a storm went viral worldwide. Some called it reckless romance, others citizen science. The truth, Elias thought, lived in the intersection. That night, power outages quilted the city. Candles flickered inside Kaya's loft, where they sipped steaming mugs of ginger tea. Jessa had gone home, leaving them to improvise communication. Half-spoken words, half-signed phrases, wholly understood silences. Kaya traced letters on his palm. Why dance for weather? He considered. Because numbers alone feel lifeless, he said, signing each clause as best he could. Movement reminds me that storms are made of breath and pulse. She smiled, touched his cheek, and signed, same. Lightning flashed through the skylight, illuminating their proximity. He leaned forward. The first kiss tasted of salt and ginger and electric air. Days passed. Cleanup crews clearing storm debris often found themselves accompanied by impromptu performances. KIA's dancers volunteered, turning chainsaw droning into percussion, twigs into batons. Elias provided micro-forecasts so crews could dodge lingering squalls. The city noticed. Grants materialized. By autumn, an old ferry terminal on the waterfront had been converted into the Confluence Institute, half research lab, half dance theater. Soundproof studios stood beside instrument arrays. Scientists learned plays to feel Coriolis force. Dancers coded Python scripts to visualize humidity. Tour groups came in droves. One November evening, Elias and Kaya stepped onto the pier outside the Institute. Clairvoyant gulls wheeled overhead, catching thermals. Inland clouds brewed like dark tea. The air smelled of cedar, diesel, and coming rain. Kaya's fingers brushed his. Storm, she signed without looking. He nodded, drawing her into the rhythmic sway that had become their greeting. Together they traced the shape of wind, she initiating with a rolling shoulder, he answering with a turning step, the two patterns locking into seamless orbit. Nearby instruments recorded barometric dips in wind vectors, but neither needed screens to understand the data. They felt it in cartilage, in sinew, in shared breath. A fairy horn moaned, streetlights blinked on, scattering gold across water. Elias lifted Kaya's hand to his lips. Air has syntax, he whispered. You're my favorite sentence. She laughed, silent and bright as sheet lightning, then signed, let's write tomorrow's forecast. Side by side they moved, scientist and choreographer, translator and listener, composing a duet for atmosphere and human skin, steps that warned and welcomed, measured and marveled, predicted and, in their own small way, transformed the weather of the world.